Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode of the Casual Couch Critics podcast, Triple C. Yes, um, we're here. My name's Jarrett. This is my co-host Zach. Hey, Zach.
Hey, how's it
And
going?
we like movies.
Yeah,
And Zach and I, we talk a lot about movies, and we thought, why not start a podcast about it? Now, obviously, we're not reinventing the wheel here. There are millions of other movie podcasts out
what
there,
there are?
and a lot of them are just by people like us who think they're, professional critics, but really they're watching it just like us on their couch. So we thought we would poke a little fun at that while not really having any credibility. I went to school for environmental science. I have no movie, uh, uh, you know, film history courses or journalism credits to my name. Zach, I don't know about you.
I technically did go to school for media and communications, but by no
Okay, so
means would I consider myself a an industry critic other than a
So what
couch
you're
critic.
s- so what I hear from that is your word is law. So we will follow
Oh,
that into into this adventure. I will be merely just a guide while Zach leads us. But no, we just thought we'd have some fun. Um, Trying to think of what we could do a bit different in the movie podcast space, and I think just poking fun about that. What we at the end of the day, we all just really like movies, and it's okay to have opinions about them too, and all of them are fun.
absolutely, absolutely. And
So, kind of how the structure will work going forward is we'll start off the podcast talking about the latest movie news, whatever we think is relevant or is important to discuss. And then we'll have kind of a feature presentation main topic uh, that will correlate to upcoming movie release. We'll probably look at some box office numbers too. I'm sure during award season we'll have some discussions about that and some other segments too as we get going here. But for this first episode, we're just going to keep things pretty bare bones and hopefully you guys enjoy that. We are at the Casual Couch Critics on YouTube and wherever you can find podcasts, so feel free to find us there, like, subscribe, rate, do what you have to do. um, Anything to add, Zach, before we dive into the first couch?
I'll just say this to anyone who's watching and viewing. Thank you for tuning in. Jared and I are just best friends. We've been friends for many, many years. And this podcast is essentially, we used to just call each other like every week and talk about movies. We're pretty much taking those conversations and making that our a video chat and making it our podcast. So
Yeah.
really we'd pretty much be doing this anyway. We just have maybe more of a, do I want to say professionalism to it? No, I don't want to say that anyway, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm excited to do this with you, man. Thanks for reaching out. And, the Casual Couch Critics has begun.
Yeah, I mean, pull up your couch and hope you enjoy the ride with us. I thought would kind of call our movie news discussion, coming soon.
Coming.
When there used to be DVDs, that would always be the first thing that would come up before the actual main menu for selection, and that kind of is a good tie into our first topic here, which is the Bike Riders. So, the Bike Riders is a movie that was actually supposed to be released in the next couple weeks here, early December,
Right.
starring Austin Butler, J.D. Comer, Tom Hardy significantly, about a motorcycle club in the 1950s and just the different characters. Very Sons of Anarchy uh, vibes when I watching it. And 20th Century Fox, or Disney, who owns 20th Century Fox, uh, recently decided to just pull it completely. It having to do with the writers and actors strike and profitability being the main thing. And when we talk about coming soon and in media, there's been a couple movies like this in the past couple months, and the Bike Riders actually, luckily, because of backlash and outcry, I believe they're selling this movie right now to other distributors. So it'll
Interesting.
probably be coming out some sort of platform or through another studio in the next year or two. But when it was supposed to come out next week, it's still a bit of a shame. And the other
Wait,
movies
wait,
that,
wait. Wait, hold up. So I didn't realize they just totally yanked it all together.
yeah,
So like if
like
I
they just
wanted
took it off.
if I had bought like pre-sale tickets for this, like they'll just get refunded?
I guess it's not coming
Wow.
out. So
Because I saw trailers for this movie.
yeah, no, the trailers were like in the theaters too, in front of
Yeah,
movies, and yeah, it just was not on their list, I guess, which kind of goes to our media erasure problem that we're having at large. With, a couple of weeks ago before this podcast started, I think it was titled "Coyote versus Acme," um,
right.
starring John Cena, kind of a Looney Tunes. Uh, Live action cartoon hybrids, sort of Space Jam style, Jessica Rabbit, all that stuff. And they have decided, that distributing company, to not promote it. Like they're not even going to release it. And I know about a year ago, the first major instance where this happened was the Batgirl movie. And
Right.
the interesting thing about all three of these films, the BikeRiders, Acme versus Coyote, and Batgirl, is that they're all completely finished. Like it's not like a Zack Snyder director's cut situation where, there was some production, issues, and it wasn't completely finished, so they'd have to go back. No, all these movies are done. And so what that means is, for the people, not, it doesn't really impact the big stars per se, but the cameramen, the set designers, all that stuff, they're not credited. They don't actually get to show that that's their work. And I think um, that's a it's a pretty big issue, and it's kind of weird to me that it is an issue, especially that we're living in the age of streaming that we are, where I don't think it should be too hard for things like that. What are your thoughts, Zach, on the kind of the media erasure and just wiping movies completely off release slates?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is, and again, we're just two guys in a podcast here, but when each of these movies comes out, it's essentially the equivalent to like if you and I wanted to open a restaurant or a store of some kind, right? Like they're its own individual franchise. And so maybe when, before these movies are set to release and these big studios look at them and they're like, you know what, if we release this, we're going to lose money on it with distribution and advertising. And then also if they really don't believe in it, do they really want a negative PR cycle, which is something they have to think about when they're marketing their
Yeah.
films, right? And so I think those are kind of some factors involved with it. For this BikeRiders one, it is interesting that it was that close to coming out, and to be yanked like that. You wonder if that was more of a strategic thing by Disney and 20th Century Fox to think, hey, you know what, we maybe they actually do believe in this movie, but they don't necessarily want to spend that money in this season because they've had a bunch of flops this year, right? It's not been a good
Totally.
year for Disney at the box office. That being said, it is a shame for the people that worked on movies like this, as you said. And it'd be, especially if it's like if it was the movie that like was your big break and you were like, man, I've been working as a third assistant cameraman for 5 years and I got to be the head camera operator on this one. This was my big break. And then for the movie to get pulled like that, yeah, that's definitely unfortunate.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because the BikeRiders, unlike the Looney Tunes and Batgirl, it had its trailer and its release date was very upcoming. And I think that release date was purposeful. And Austin Butler, the lead, he was Oscar nominee last year for Elvis,
Yeah.
and
Right. Yeah.
And this is award season movie time. I believe this, whenever it comes out, will have some Oscar push, whether it's Oscar bait or not. I mean, it remains to be seen if it's actually a good movie, but the trailer seemed entertaining enough. So it's a bit surprising when a company drops something like this, where there would have been some award buzz going into the new year for sure. And I think it also links to another media erasure problem. I saw like Best Buy is officially stopping sales of physical media,
Yeah.
and that's the other thing to think about when it comes to these movies is, again, in the age of streaming service and stuff, I don't know why you couldn't just put that movie up, but these movies wouldn't even be able to be released on like a Blu-ray or DVD to be sold to the public. Like, essentially, it's just stored and kept away. And I know
Yeah.
there's been some shows, like the Willow show, it didn't do well on Disney, and so they actually pulled it. And some of the younger actors, to your point, who that was their big break, was like, well, I can't obtain this, I can't show it to
Yeah.
anyone. And so, the loss of physical media, while people have been buying less of it, I think availability is still important. So I'm not really sure the solution to that problem. I know that's not why we're here or created this podcast for our first topic. It's pretty philosophical and at a pay grade way higher than ours, but I think it's becoming an issue that I hope doesn't continue, and that studios find a way to compromise rather than removing it altogether.
Well, and like you almost hope, and this is again totally a fabricated idea of thin air. Like you almost wish there was a streaming service that was like the trash streaming service that's like free or whatever, and like if you have a completed movie that you don't believe in as a studio, it goes to this streaming
Yeah.
service, and like anyone can watch it and critique it, make fun of it or whatever. But yeah, you definitely you don't like seeing something that a studio spent millions of dollars, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars on,
Yeah.
and then just they read it off as a tax write-off, right? And that's ultimately that's probably what their decision was, where they'd make more money as a tax write-off than they were to if they were to actually release that film.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, looking forward
I
to
hope
see
this
the
movie
bike
comes
rider.
out though, because it actually looks pretty good.
Yeah, whenever the Bike Riders comes out, I will be seeing it. So,
Yeah,
and I would have seen the John Cena Looney Tunes movie and Batgirl too,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
those two, yeah.
Like I wasn't even like super. I don't think I had even heard of the John Cena Looney Tunes until they canceled it, and I was like, oh,
No, that's why.
I would have saw that.
Yeah, so I thought too at first, to your point, that oh, they must have not even started filming this. He must have signed on, and then scheduling conflict, or it was fully done from what
Done,
I've
yeah.
read. So it's crazy. But yeah, I
And
would
think of
watch
it
all three of those.
like just, and I know we're gonna move on to our next subject here, but just think of it. If you're an actor or a crew member or a director, probably between 6 and 9 months of your life, you gave up,
Yeah.
you put in a lot of hours into making this, and then just to see it kind of shut down like that's gotta be discouraging.
Yeah, and like we talked about before, it's not a situation like the Zack Snyder cut, right? Where it's just sitting in a room somewhere that they have access to. It's like it's out of these people's control, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Actually, who worked on the film? It's in the studio executives' hands. So anyway, good first topic for our podcast, I think.
Absolutely.
Um, all right. Now, the second topic, you know, we're not going to shy away from main franchises. We know plenty of movie podcasts are devoted to the main franchises, and we would be silly to lie to you and say we do not like big franchise movies. Um,
Yeah.
and it would be silly to say we don't love Dave Filoni. Zach,
Oh
Dave
yeah.
Filoni, promoted at Lucasfilm to chief creative officer. Um, I know we have been following him closely for many years, you and I, way back with his work on Avatar: The Last Airbender show, to then
Mhm.
getting noticed by George Lucas, the Clone Wars TV show, Rebels
Amazing.
TV show,
Love it.
um, being used with Jon Favreau as a launching point for The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka. Um, and this is a long time coming, I think, this promotion. A lot of people, in the Star Wars community, to my knowledge, view Dave Filoni as kind of the next guy who can take the mantle from George Lucas. Disney has been a bit up and down, to say it lightly, since the acquisition about a decade ago. Um, but Dave Filoni and I guess Jon Favreau is part of that too. Um, they've kind of been the highs rather than the lows of the Disney Star Wars journey that currently exists. And what this promotion really does, from my understanding, is Dave Filoni, essentially the studio executives like Kathleen Kennedy, who's still in the head of Lucasfilm, who I know has a lot of controversy around her decisions, but Dave Filoni would just receive what they've decided and work on that on the back end after those decisions are made. Now, this doesn't remove him from working on projects, but now in this chief creative officer role, he will actually help with the decision making on the front end of what projects to work on, what that would mean direction wise. Um, and I think that's a good move. I'm surprised it's taken this long. But
Yeah.
I guess he hadn't really moved from animation to live action, so maybe that was part of it on Disney's side. Either way, I think this is a good PR move, and I think he's gonna do well in this role.
Yeah, I agree. And again, for I know people have their criticisms of Dave Filoni, but full disclosure, this is a pro Filoni podcast.
Yep.
Definitely Jared and I, we've been following Dave's career for a while. And he's one of those people that whenever he's gotten his name attached to something or a promotion of some kind, I personally kind of celebrate. I feel like when Dave's getting promoted, I'm getting promoted, even though like
Yep.
that's not the case at all. But I'm really curious to see what this does for the Star Wars creative direction as a whole. I know that there's a lot of debate around Kathleen Kennedy and her handling of Star Wars. Very valid criticism out there for sure. But in regards to the creative aspect of Lucasfilm over the past couple of years, you can't deny the ball has been dropped so many times because we've heard about these projects being announced and then just canceled,
Mm-hmm.
or creative differences, or anything along those lines, right? And I think for Lucasfilm to really continue to be a juggernaut in the IP space, in the movie industry, they need to get Star Wars fans excited about Star Wars again, right? Yes, you got to continue to seek new fans, absolutely. But there is something about honoring your fan base that has stuck with a franchise for a long time. And Dave Filoni, I think he gets that. Like when you see interviews, you see a man who, yes, he's a talented creative artist, but he also is a fan of the franchise. And I think just in terms of continuity, I think Star Wars is going to improve a lot under with this promotion. And the one thing I'll say this about Dave Filoni: anytime you see him in an interview, he comes across as someone who is willing to learn, someone who is a collaborator. He's not a dictator in a creative room, and that's something I appreciate about him. And I think he's making that transition from animation to live action. He's got a couple of opportunities with the Mandalorian, and Ahsoka and things like that, and we'll see how that finishes up. But I'm really happy for Dave Filoni. I think this is a well deserved promotion, and I know that he's well aware of the pressure and the honor it is to get to handle an IP like Star Wars.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there about continuity. Since the rise of Skywalker, already 4 years old. Um,
Wow.
there hasn't been any movies.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. One, Disney received a lot of backlash for the handling of that trilogy, um, and they haven't really made a direction. They said, okay, let's go in the TV space, and they asked Filoni and Jon Favreau, right, to connect these shows to the sequel trilogy on the back end of things. And for continuity to take place, I think you need to have a direction to go, and that's been the main cry, I think, from a lot of fans of this IP is, where are we going?
Yeah.
Like, how does this all link up? Or not even with the Skywalker timeline, like, post Rise of Skywalker, are we going anywhere? Are we going back? There's been Old Republic projects canceled. Like, just tell us a path we're going on, and that there's a plan laid out. And I think if his work on the Clone Wars specifically is any indication, segmented episodes, but with a storyline throughout the middle of that whole show, that Dave Filoni has a plan, and when he has time to create it. And I think this is a good step, and I think I'm okay waiting a few more years without a Star Wars movie. I think if with this role, I think the next one's got to be right from Disney. I think Disney knows that. I feel like they're very aware of the pressure that is now on them for whatever that next movie is going to be. And there is going to be a next movie. Some Star Wars fans might not like that. The reality is they paid $4 billion for this intellectual property. There's going to be more,
Which they've made back. They've made it
which
back.
they've made back.
Yeah.
But it's more of a reputation thing at this point, which I think is why it's taken this long for a movie to come out, why those projects that you mentioned have been canceled. And, you know, I think I'm okay waiting a few more years if they get it right. And so, yeah.
I would love to, at some point in my adult life, come out of a Star Wars movie again that I saw for the first time, and just be like, that was awesome, right? And like, I think I totally agree with you that if they could take the time, plan out a trilogy, plan out a legit trilogy, because all the criticisms of the sequel trilogy, I think the number one is that they did not have a plan. That between the Force Awakens, the Last Jedi, and the Rise of Skywalker, like it's a hot mess at best. And
Yep.
if they truly planned out an epic trilogy, and I would say Dave Filoni is one of the few people that I would trust with a Star Wars trilogy being involved from like a story level. I would love it, and I think that they could really, I think they could bank at the box office again. And if they could make a movie that just the fans love, right?
Yeah, 100%. I'm not even focused on it. I just want to see one movie, not even a trilogy. Like
Not
one
even
movie.
true, just one good movie.
Yeah, because I think, to and not to belabor this subject too long, but while The Force Awakens took a lot of A New Hope and copy pasted it, there was still a lot of anticipation built for what the next movie was going to be, ignoring the faults of the first movie at that time. I think we
Yeah,
just need a complete story,
yeah,
within it that can be itself.
yeah,
Just like the original trilogy, the prequels kind of were dependent on one another a little bit more, but definitely not as much as the sequel trilogy, leaning into each other to try to hide the faults, which
yeah,
didn't work. But
yeah.
I totally agree with what you're saying there. Okay, next up on our coming soon announcement. I know this one, Zach, you are extremely hyped for, as if the Star
What
Wars
are we
one
talking about?
couldn't hype you enough. The
Yeah.
Karate Kid multiverse is here. I didn't know if I'd ever say that in my life, but we're saying it. Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio are meeting
Machi.
together to reprise their individual characters from separate Karate Kid franchises to make a new Karate Kid movie. Now, Jackie Chan, you might remember, you're like, he wasn't Mr. Miyagi. You're right, he wasn't. He mentored Jaden Smith in, I believe, 2010 reboot of Karate Kid, which actually did fairly well. I think in part because there was a Justin Bieber song attached to it. But and then the original Karate Kid movies, obviously with Ralph Macchio being the Karate Kid, and kind of rising in fame again the past 6-7 years or so with this very successful show Cobra Kai, which I believe is ending shortly. So Zach,
Out, yeah.
I'll leave the floor to you for this one. What do you think about a new Karate Kid movie, but also bringing Jackie Chan in from being the same character in that franchise, while Ralph Macchio kind of maintains this resurgence of his Karate Kid legacy?
Okay, let me start with this. I love the original Karate Kid movie. Karate Kid 2 and 3 and all the ones after that, it was like, okay, like I guess they make sense. But I don't think that they're these phenomenal movies. But then when Cobra Kai came out, I felt Cobra Kai actually makes those movies better. Personally, that's just I love the Cobra Kai series. I'm really excited to see the final season when it comes out. I know it got delayed because of the strikes and things like that, but really excited to see where they finish that off. But when I saw this announcement, because I always felt that the one outlier Karate Kid movie was the Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan movie, that was not part of the Cobra Kai universe or any of the other Karate Kid movies. It was just sort of an outlier. So when I saw this announcement, I was like, okay, clearly they must have some sort of creative angle to make this all work. I don't know if they're gonna have that Mr. Miyagi he was somehow related or knew
I
or
hope
trained with the Jackie Chan's character. I don't know. I don't know how they're gonna do that. I'm really excited to see it. I think it's the thing I like about this franchise is the Karate Kid, though it is over the top, it takes a certain amount of suspended disbelief of like, okay, it's a karate soap opera, right?
Yep.
That's essentially what it is, especially Cobra Kai.
Yep.
But it's a very relatable movie franchise. Everyone has that bully or that someone that maybe doesn't fully see from their perspective, and it kind of puts that wall up with them. And then on that flip side, that bully has a story that maybe you don't see why that person is seeing eye to eye with that person. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Karate Kid franchise is so relatable and why it has done so well. So when the Karate Kid multiverse kind of came out, and we still don't technically know if it's not in the same universe, but it is a cinematic universe, which, that's the world we live in today.
Yep.
I'm really curious to see what they do with it. I'm going to be one of the, like, when this movie comes out, like opening night, I'll be there. I will be there. And the fact that both Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio are involved, sign me up. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, December 13th, 2024, almost a year away, is when they plan on releasing the movie. I believe it's scheduled to start shooting early next year. And so, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. To be honest, I really hope they don't relate Jackie Chan to Mr. Miyagi. I think that'd be a lot of, palms.
You just want them to be like friends or something? I don't know.
I don't know. That'd be the most franchise thing ever to do that, and I'm hoping for something. I know, and I think part of the Karate Kid is its cheesiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a key aspect actually to its success, and its relatability, to be honest. And
also, like, just side note, I'm sorry I'm cutting you off.
No, you're good.
these movies are not super expensive to make, right? Like I think in today's world of $100 million films, the Karate Kid isn't, and the Cobra Kai series, they don't take CGI. Like you just need your camera crew, your sound crew, your lighting, your typical TV crew or movie crew, and then your actors. Really, like once they have their script and they like their script, they can film this movie pretty quick. And now that means it's still a lot to announce a movie and then just pretty much a year later have it come out. That's a pretty quick turnaround time. But they must have a script that they were like, oh, green light this now, right? And they maybe took an eye at the movie landscape. There's going to be a bit of a lull coming because of the actors and writers strikes. And if they felt they can make this movie in a short amount of time on a what won't be a big budget for Hollywood level, I'm excited to see what they do.
Yeah, I know you will be anticipating that trailer, probably even now, and we'll see how it goes. I hope it's a success.
Well, and I'm curious, like with the final, just one last thing, with the final season of Cobra Kai coming out, do they relate it to that somehow? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe Daniel like falls through a portal and then
maybe Jaden Smith appears in the last episode of Cobra Kai. We'll see. It is a bizarre decision to me, but I'm sure it will make money. Okay.
As long as they have like karate and over the top emotions, I'm here for it.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. So that kind of concludes our overview of the latest top storylines that we wanted to talk about. And like I said at the beginning of the show, each week we'll have a main topic that we want to dive into. What we'd like to call our feature presentation. Yeah, we came up with that ourselves. And I thought it would be good. And again, we're not going to be a franchise heavy focused podcast. We like all movies, but the most recent movie at the time of this recording and the most successful one right now happens to be The Hunger Games: Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds, I believe is the title. It's quite a lengthy one. Songbirds and Snakes, not Snakes and Songbirds. I apologize to all the people out there. This is an interesting movie to me for several reasons. One, it's a sequel to, or rather a prequel to a franchise that concluded like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, it shouldn't work. Like the success of this movie shouldn't happen. And I think that I have a few reasons for, and we'll discuss this movie individually. Zach, get your take on it. But just as a whole, the 2010 to 2015 era of young adult dystopian content, that's a weird phase to look back on. If you remember, it didn't start with The Hunger Games, but The Hunger Games was definitely the biggest success out of that genre.
Yeah. Big player.
The Maze Runner series, the Divergent series, I Am Number 4, The Host, Ender's Game. Remember Ender's Game? That's all in there. The Mortal Instruments, City of Bones, which didn't do well, so it became a Netflix show, I think. I didn't really keep up with that one. There's a lot of young adult kind of dystopian, end of the world, humans or kids are being trained or tortured or something, and they have to uprise against the government. It kind of goes, around this time, 2010, 2011, the Harry Potter franchise was wrapping up. The Twilight franchise is wrapping up. So it was like, what is next? And I think personally, I have no evidence for this. Again, I am just a casual couch critic. But the rise in more postmodern thinking of individualism, of millennials, taking control of their individuality. You know, a bit of anti-government, a lot of these themes, a lot of you know, uh, female leads, which again is not a knock on them. It was actually, I think it's a big breakthrough. Um, and they all kind of felt the same.
Yeah.
Like every one of these, not just the Hunger Games franchise, but all these dystopian teen movies, and they kind of came and went. And I think that's kind of because Marvel hadn't quite, it was building, but that's early Marvel's 2010,
Yeah.
2011.
It
And
wasn't peak MCU. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't peak MCU, it wasn't peak franchise, to be
Yeah.
honest. This was kind of the start of the franchise era,
Mhm.
and in a lot of ways. And the Hunger Games was definitely the most successful out of that. 4 movies. Um, and then along comes this prequel, like 8 years after, and it's doing well. And Zach, what are your thoughts on kind of this weird? I don't think we've seen this before that I can think of.
Yeah, and I think like there's a couple of factors that go into this. Number one, I actually think it's a decent movie. I saw it myself on a Tuesday cheap night. I went into it with pretty low expectations. For me, I enjoyed the Hunger Game movies, but for me, they were one time watches. Like I I wouldn't say like the original Star Wars trilogy. I've seen countless times. I'm not going to rewatch the original 4 Hunger Game movie. You know, like I've never once thought, hey, let's have a Hunger Game movie marathon, right? Like I'm sure some people have, but I have not. But going into this prequel movie, definitely had the thought of like, okay, like I enjoyed the Hunger Games. I guess one of the interesting characters from it was President Snow. Sure, that could be an interesting story about how he, you know, rose to power. And it was it's you know, it's not a perfect movie by any means, but I would say it's maybe a little longer than it needed to be, but I enjoyed it. I think that audiences are looking for a movie that's just a good story. And out of a lot of movies that we've gotten recently, I'd say that you know this Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds is kind of the movie that's probably has the most like it is a linear story, like it's a point A to point B, things that happen along the way narrative. And it's easy to follow, but it's enjoyable to follow as well, as opposed to like a convoluted mess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a few reasons why this movie in particular is successful and can be. And I hope
Mhm.
studios don't necessarily replicate it, because I'm going to describe my thoughts here as to why I think it was kind of made at the perfect time. And so the book itself by Susan Collins, who made The Hunger Games, it came out during COVID and was kind
Right.
of, and I think part of that is like, COVID, we're still recovering from, individually, but also as a movie industry, um, trying to return to whatever a new normal is. I think this was a bit of a nostalgia for a lot of people. I think the book was very successful. It came out during COVID. It had a virtual release, um, and and for people that was something, like a bit of warmth for them during some tough times that all of us experienced. It being greenlit and then creating this movie, it's very surprising, but I think, in a post-COVID world, as we're trying to return to normal, I think people might be going to the theater to see an old franchise that, and yeah, I mean, 8 years isn't that old in terms of time as a whole, but as a prequel to a series that's kind of out of public mind, um, I think it was written and it got greenlit at a good time where, we're still seeking movies. The movie industry as a whole is still recovering from COVID. I mean, we have a bunch of movie delays that are happening even now that are going to impact, in addition to the writers and actors strike, that are going to be pushed for years and years. It's going to take probably 3 or 4 years if for all these movie schedules to be on track. But I think it came out at a good time for people, both the book and the movie. Now, I'm also surprised on its success a little bit because its lead actors, like Tom Blythe, this is his breakout role, essentially. He's
Yeah,
had some supporting roles in some
he's
movies and
good.
TV shows, but it's this actor that a lot of people haven't necessarily heard of. Rachel Zegler, the actress, you know, she's very talented, and she's obviously caught Hollywood's eye because she's been in the West Side Story remake with Steven Spielberg. She was in a superhero movie, Shazam 2, which
Shazam
didn't do,
2.
yeah, which didn't do well, but I mean, she was a superhero movie is a big deal to be cast in.
Yeah,
Um, and she's going to be probably most notoriously the new Snow White in the whenever that comes out for Disney. And so
right.
she's going from franchise to franchise, from big film to big film. So obviously Hollywood sees something in her. Now her press relations has been what I'm referring to. A lot of people don't seem to necessarily kind of like how she presents herself, and I'm not going to judge that, but I'm surprised still at the success of the movie with two relatively unknown uh, or publicly popular figures. And I think maybe that's why they cast a Peter Dinklage, a Jason Schwartzman, a Viola Davis.
Right.
And good for the studios who did this. Francis Lawrence returned. He did Catching Fire and the two Mockingjay movies, and that's pretty common with franchises, except for Star Wars, in terms of holding on to directors. Gary Ross, I think he did the first one, and then he left. But having someone who knows that world, returning to be able to direct, and Suzanne Collins, the author, she actually got her start writing in children's shows. So she knows how to adapt a screenplay. And I think that also lends to why it's potentially the most popular and most successful of the dystopian teen era franchises. I think all of that works for this movie. I don't know if we'll ever see something like it ever again. Um, but yeah, wow. Definitely unprecedented right now.
Yeah, and I'll maybe just push back a little on, you don't want this to become like a trend in Hollywood. And I think I'm okay with it as long as there's a good story there, right? As long as there is, the narrative there. If it's just, to cash in on a popular franchise, which I'll be honest, when I first heard about this movie, that's what I thought, oh, like, oh, that's just a
Yeah.
cash grab,
Yeah.
right? And and that's definitely been done before with prequel movies
Totally.
and things like that. Like, but I think something about this movie that also is important to take account is it's coming out in a season where a lot of its competitions, like the
Yep.
Marvels, is not doing well. Trolls, is it called World Tour? No, I forget what it's called, the band or something. I don't know. The new Trolls movie, it's like it has a specific audience that would
Yep.
be different than this movie in particular. So I think that those external circumstances, not having a lot of competition, combined with it actually being a pretty like fun time, like a good experience. Like, I left the movie theater thinking about the movie. I left it, I called you right after I saw it, and I was just like, I'm still processing it. There's a lot to like about the movie. There's criticisms as well. Again, I still think that very long delayed third act was could have edited that a lot differently, but I enjoyed
Yep.
it. I would go. I wouldn't go see this again alone, but if my friend called me up and was like, "Hey, I'm going to go see this movie. Do you want to come?" I would say yes.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I think it came out at the perfect time, the absolute perfect time. All the circumstances leading up to it, I think, like the
Mhm.
stars aligned for this to be a success. And
Yeah. What do you know? What's it at right now in the box office?
so it's made 162 million, which
Okay.
for first 2 weeks is pretty good. Now its budget was about 100 million.
Okay, so it probably needs 300 mil to break even at least.
Probably. The thing is,
Yeah.
right now with box office is it's hard to judge where the trend is going right now based on
Yeah.
streaming numbers and
And,
cinema performance isn't necessarily as it used to be, you know.
yeah.
So,
And I actually think this movie could do quite well when it does go to digital, because it has
yep,
had some success in the box office, right?
yep, 100%. Zach, I'm curious. Like you mentioned a bit, you weren't necessarily a big fan of like one time watch, but you'd watch it again if you had to. This franchise as a whole, um, does the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, is that number one for you? Is that recency bias? Like,
Ooh,
is there does it
that's a really
hold?
good question.
As a prequel, is it good because it's a prequel, or like in the franchise, like a lot of people are saying, this movie stands on its own 2 feet. Obviously, it's part
Yeah.
of the greater universe, but I guess where would you put it now that we're revisiting this universe again?
That's a really good question. I haven't thought about that till this moment. So essentially, if I'm ranking all 5 Hunger Game movies, I definitely for me, Catching Fire Part 2 is the lowest for me personally.
Mockingjay Part Two.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Mockingjay.
yeah.
Yeah, Mockingjay Part 2. Then I would probably put Catching Fire, Mockingjay Part 1 at 3. Two, you know what? I'm not the I out of the whole thing. I am going to say the original Hunger Games, just because I'm really into world building, and I thought the first movie did a pretty good job of world building this world. I'm still keeping it at number one, the original first movie, but I'm comfortable putting this Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds here at number two in this franchise for sure.
Yeah, and again, that's pretty impressive nonetheless for a
Yeah,
movie coming out
definitely.
8 years
Yeah.
after the
If
the
anyone's
last
watching
one.
this, let us know your rankings in the comments below. I'd love to know if you
Yeah,
agree or disagree
for
with me.
sure. Um, yeah, curious if this is officially the end, but I guess if the author keeps making good stories, like you said, perhaps there's more to explore here. I just don't want like a Fantastic Beast situation, I think is more what I was referring to before,
Yeah,
where the author was involved in creating stories, J.K. Rowling, and the movies weren't working for numerous reasons, but the screenplay was also a reason. And so I think if the story's good, like you said, I'm okay with that trend continuing. Any last thoughts on kind of this movie in particular or the franchise as a whole?
so we know that studios, when a movie is profitable, often they're like, okay, how can we keep making money off this? And you wonder, does the conversation happen of, hey, like, do you want to write more books or hire another author to write more books so that we could do a sequel trilogy or something to it, right? And I could see a story being there. I think that Pan Am is an interesting enough world that people would want to go back to it, check in. How is Cadmus doing? And it would be interesting. It would be really interesting to see if they go back to it. I don't know if we see that in the near future, but it would not shock me. If this movie is profitable and there's especially if it has really solid streaming numbers, if a studio was like, hey, we get us some more Hunger Games movies, I can see that happen.
Yeah, I think a sequel is an interesting discussion because Jennifer Lawrence's Hunger Games was obviously the platform that elevated her career into what it is today, being one of the most successful actresses in Hollywood. But she's also worked hard to distance herself from franchises.
Yeah.
Obviously being part of X-Men 2. Um, so we'll see where they go. In your eyes, do you think they could do more with the Snow character if they wanted a new prequel series with this kind of new cast?
I think it'd be a stretch. It would be a huge stretch. Not that they can't do anything with it, but like, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna try? So like at the end of the movie, he rises to power as the game master, and like, sorry, spoiler alert. But like, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna have like his attempt, like people who attempt to overthrow him, and he takes the capital forces and just shows his power or something? So I guess there could potentially be a story there, but in my mind, it would be a stretch. Just I think, you know what? I said this to my friend who also saw the movie. I said, I wish I would have seen this movie before seeing the Hunger Games.
Hmm.
And I've often thought that about even Star Wars. Like, I wish I would have seen, like I know that's not the way it worked out, but like I wish I would have seen the prequel trilogy that led into the original trilogy. And I would have loved to have that narrative, because like even in this movie, there's not a lot of stakes for the Snow character, because he becomes President Snow.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it would be interesting to me if this movie became, if they did more movies that were in between the first Hunger Game movie and this one.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think that just goes back to what I was saying about, if it's going to be done, do it right. I think the
Yeah.
stars all aligned for this one, and happy that's being successful rather, and that people are having a good time with it. It's always fun to revisit franchises that you kind of thought were done, and something fresh kind of comes along to revitalize it. I know, if we're talking for franchises, like Rogue One was a big one, right?
Yeah.
Of recent, even the newer Star Trek movies and X-Men First Class, like there's just fresh spins on popular IPs that haven't been touched in a while, and yeah, this one's been pretty good. All right, well, any final thoughts before we end the first couch podcast?
Jared, this was a blast. It says that we've been doing this for 52-ish minutes, and wow, it did not feel like that. That flew by. That was a lot of fun. I hope people enjoy this. I know some of you that are watching, maybe you subscribe to my YouTube channel where I talk about the LA Rams. Thanks for coming on over, giving this podcast a chance. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. And let us know in the comments if there's a movie from your past or the future that you want us to talk about on the next episode. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I completely concur. And like we said before, should be available on other podcasting where we get your podcasts. And yeah, thanks for rolling with us and being with us for the very first episode as we kind of fine tune things, what we want out of this. It was a lot of fun. And we'll see you on the next episode. All right. See ya.